Okay, we will get started. If you're joining us online, welcome. And if you're not, then you're not watching because everything's online tonight. But we're glad to have everybody tuning in. We're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 10 because I realized after last week's class, and I'm sure the two shepherds here with me knew it immediately that I was in the wrong book. But they spared my sensitive feelings and didn't realize that I did the wrong one. Been too many weeks since I got to do either Bible class. So this week we'll be in Ecclesiastes. Lord willing, we'll be back to our Sunday Bible class on Philippians soon. Just a quick update. We will stay with this format of no Bible classes tonight, this coming Sunday, and next Wednesday to try to let the last of these cases sort of clear out from among our families and stuff. And then, Lord willing, the Sunday after that, we'll be back to Bible class. We have the fall family, not fun night, trunk or treat coming up, Halloween. Again, if things go okay, we will have that as we planned. If things have gotten worse at that point for some reason, we do have Plan B. We'll still get the candy out to kids, but it won't necessarily be a trunk or treat with costumes and all of that. We'll get that information out a little bit later. Watch your emails and stuff in the next couple of days. The sign up to host one of the trunks, to bring your vehicle, decorate your trunk, hand out candy. All the sign-ups for that will be online, and we will have a sign-up sheet at the building here Sunday for those who are here for that. So just keep that in mind. Be praying for that. Be praying for our community, that those who are struggling with this sickness right now will get over it and nothing gets any worse. That's what we're hoping for. But for now, let's look over to Ecclesiastes chapter 10. Ecclesiastes chapter 10. We're in a section of Proverbs that are here in Ecclesiastes. They actually make up the last quarter of the book of Ecclesiastes or so. Wisdom, and again, as with the rest of the book, you always have to take all of this, not with a grain of salt, but with the understanding most of it is speaking from a worldly perspective. What would life be like if we did not have a God to put our hope in? If God was not in charge, how pointless would this all be? And that's the whole book of Ecclesiastes. If God wasn't there, this would be meaningless, is the word that Solomon uses the most here. But here he's gone into this series of Proverbs. So let's just jump into it. There's not as much a stream of consciousness as just a bunch of pointed sayings that are true in life regardless, but they gain a little more meaning when you approach them from the perspective of faith. So look at chapter 10, verse 1. As dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. The heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. Pause here. We'll pause quite frequently through this. As dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. Isn't this true? Just in life in general, you can do a whole lot of good, but do one dumb, bad thing, and what are people going to remember? The dumb thing, the bad thing, the whatever. You can have a life that's 99% good, but if the one bad thing sticks out enough, that's not how people are going to judge you. Thankfully, though, that's not how God judges us, is it? Part of a way to look at some of these proverbs is to contrast them. From the world's perspective, this is absolutely true. Foolishness, evil, whatever, outweighs wisdom and honor. It does more to damage our credibility, our reputation, all of that. But with God, all of our folly, all of our evil, all of our stupidity is outweighed by Jesus' righteousness. So he's able to overcome that problem. The world looks at it one way, God looks at it a very different way. Now, this is, again, still true from the world's perspective. That's why a reputation is such a delicate thing. You spend years and years building a good reputation, you can destroy it in one moment of weakness or one moment of foolishness. And we've seen that happen many, many, many times, unfortunately. Um, and then verse 2 and verse 3 actually go together a little bit. So let's read that one again. Verse 2, the heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. Even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense and show everyone how stupid they are. I just like the way that one's translated. Uh, Even in Ecclesiastes, even in this context, isn't it interesting how he goes back to the heart so often? The heart of the wise does one thing, the heart of fools do another. They lean one direction or another. Now, this is not a commentary on politics. That's not, modern day politics was not what he was talking about when he goes left and right. More like the sheep and the goats from Revelation would be a better way of looking at this. The heart of the wise leans towards wisdom and righteousness and love. That's what they pursue. And it's not that they can't do foolish things. The wisest person in the world can be stupid, according to this next verse, from moment to moment. They can do all the wise stuff, but occasionally make a bad choice. The fool, on the other hand, the evil person, they're always leaning the wrong way. They're always pursuing the other. Doesn't mean they can't do good things on occasion, but that's not where they tend to lean, tend to put their focus, their intent. And that's really what this is talking about. What's the overall intent of our lives? For some people, it's to be a good person. That's what they strive to be. That's what they strive to do. For others, maybe something else. They want to be the most popular, the wealthiest, the most in the know, the most whatever. That's sort of how you can tell which way a person's heart is leaning, is what do they give the most emphasis to in their life. I do. As they walk along the road, they show everyone how stupid they are. Have you ever known somebody like that? No names, please. Just leave the names out of it. But that they constantly demonstrate their lack of sense. I've had a few people in my life over the years that I would probably put in this category. Loved them anyway, though sometimes they made it difficult. Look down at verse 4. We'll just keep going here. If a ruler's anger arises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great offenses to rest. Again, these are short proverbs to live by. And here's really a point of wisdom that you can pay somebody a lot of money to tell you this, actually. Coaches and corporate, advice givers and all of that. That's their technical term, corporate advice givers. I'm pretty sure that's not it. Sometimes the best thing you can do when you're in trouble is stand there. Don't react. Don't run away. Don't make a big deal about it. Just stand and take it until you really know what's going on. I'll use an example from my life from early on that I did the right thing, but only by accident, all right? So don't think I'm tooting my own horn. I'm not. I was just too stupid to know what to do, so I did nothing, and that was the least stupid thing I could do. I got in trouble when I was in school, and I had the director of the school call me in, and the first thing he said is, I'm that close to kicking you out of here. And I didn't even know I was in trouble. And I'm like, what do I do? And he asked me, he goes, well, when do you graduate? And I kid you not, the only thing that went through my mind at that point was, I sort of think that depends on how this conversation goes. But again, thankfully, God watches over infants and idiots. That didn't actually come out of my mouth. My friend, who was also in trouble apparently, answered for me. He goes, well, he graduates in May, and then my buddy graduated in the January before. And the director just went on to lay into us, just, I can't believe what you did and how you behaved and this and that. And we just chewed on us. And the whole time I was completely confused. Like, what did I do? I didn't think I'd done anything wrong. I mean, maybe I had a bad grade on a paper, but good grief, this didn't seem appropriate. Well, I said nothing. He dismissed us. I said nothing still, walked out, went back to class. I remember asking my buddy on the way back to class, did he just kick us out of school? And my buddy Dave goes, I don't think so. I said, well, if he did, I don't want to go take this test. I'm, I'm not going to take the test if I'm not here anymore. But he didn't kick me out, thankfully, and we went and took the test. It wasn't until I was driving home that night that all the pieces clicked into place. I finally figured out what he was so infuriated about. And it was something I didn't actually do. What had happened was there were two secretaries that worked in the church where the school was, and they had a really nice copier where the secretaries were that we as students were normally not supposed to use because it was worth too much money and they weren't going to let students do it. We had two old junkers up in the library that we were supposed to use. But for a particular class we were in, we were supposed to copy some old overheads, if you remember overheads, the overhead transparencies. And the ones in the student library could not do that. If you put a transparency through it, would have destroyed it. So we went to the secretary and said, would it be okay if we just ran these here? We didn't, we were being cheap. We were students. We had no money. We didn't want to go to Kinko's. And back then you'd pay $2-3 a transparency. And she said, yeah, no problem. She goes, I'm about to leave, so just turn out the lights and lock the door when you leave. Okay, yeah, great, no problem. Well, there was another secretary that worked the next room office down, and I don't know exactly how their two jobs were described. Well, me and Dave were sitting there making these transparencies. She came in and says, okay, I'm leaving. We said, okay, see you tomorrow. What she actually thought she said, or what she apparently meant to say, was, you two need to get out of here, but neither one of us heard it. And so the next morning, she went straight to the director and told him that we snuck in behind her back, that we were rude and wouldn't leave when we were told to, and that we had just broken all these rules, which wasn't what happened. Well, by the next day, I'd figured all this out, and I'm like, okay, I've got to do something about this. So I wait till the end of the day. That's the longest day of school ever. And I'm waiting for everybody to get out of the director's office so I can go talk to him. And what I didn't know is the other secretary, the one that had let us come in and make the copies, had heard what happened and already gone to him and corrected the issue. But everybody cleared out, and I walked into the director's office and I said, I have a problem. So what happened yesterday wasn't right. You were dead wrong about what we did. And he looked at me and said, I know, I'm sorry. I'm like, okay, great. And actually from that point on, me and the director got along really good. My buddy, however, just to show you the difference, when Dave was griping at us, the problem is they're both named Dave. Dave the director and Dave my buddy. When he was griping at us, my buddy Dave tried to argue back a little bit, which really just made it a whole lot worse. And then afterwards, he would never go back to the director to clarify the situation. He was just 2 months from graduating. All he said he wanted to do is keep his head down and get out. But because I waited until I knew what I was talking about and then was able to approach him knowing where I stood, it actually made everything a whole lot better. All right, that was a long story for a short parable. But the idea is sometimes keep quiet till you know what to say. The gut response isn't always the best one. Now, I made that mistake plenty of times as well. I won't tell those stories.
This type of thing is going on quite a bit in our society today, in the political realm. Well, everywhere really, but I mean, no, it doesn't seem like anyone is allowed to have their opinion anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, you like that and you think that's right. okay, I disagree, but I do this, and we go off our way and we just do it. Now it's sit there and argue like if we're going to change someone's mind by
Oh,
how they're
absolutely.
wrong.
Actually, I read an article today, just a little blurb. It was about a tweet had been posted on Twitter. You tweet on Twitter. Uh, and it was actually just sort of a joke tweet. And it listed all the Chris's in Hollywood. Chris Hemsworth, Chris Pratt, all the Chris Pine, missing one of them. And the thing was, one has to go. In other words, pick all the Chris's in Hollywood. If you had to get rid of one of them, which one would it be? It was just meant to be funny, really. And the people's response was Chris Pratt, Star-Lord, or if you like the old, which I love, the Parks and Rec, he was the goofy guy on that. And what started out as something funny quickly over the last 2 days became something mean. Because then people really started attacking him, particularly because he's a practicing Christian and an outspoken Christian at that. He apparently hadn't gone to a political rally for Joe Biden that a lot of his co-stars went to. So people decided he had to be racist and all that junk. And then since he goes to church and he's a Christian, they said, well, he also hates gay people and everything else. None of which was true. The one thing I have to say I've admired reading the story the last day or two is that the one person who has not weighed in is him. And even though he normally goes on social media quite a bit, he just backed off. And what was nice was it was all of his buddies, the Avengers, who stepped in to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. We know this guy personally. He is everything but what you're claiming he is. His faith is genuine and he really lives that life, so quit attacking him. Sometimes just to sit there and be quiet when somebody goes off is the best response.
When it starts off and it talks about rulers' anger rises against you, and today we don't have rulers, but we have bosses or people we have to.
And and like we were talking about, we have political correctness. Political correctness in our country has become a force to be reckoned with. It holds immense power. And sometimes the best way to fight it is just don't engage. But that's hard. I want to have the last word every time. But that's not the wise way. How about verse 5? There is an evil I have seen under the sun, the sort of error that arises from a ruler. Fools are put in many high positions, while the rich occupy the low ones. I have seen slaves on horseback, while princes go on foot like slaves. Okay, yes, I'm laughing. It's not always the smartest, best people who end up in the most powerful positions. That's true in business, it's true in government, it's just true in life. That doesn't mean that good people don't, aspire to top positions. But the position a person holds in no way necessarily reflects the quality of the individual. I mean, we can see that in our own country, in our history, 1,000, 10,000 times over. Life doesn't always work the way it's supposed to. Really, this is Solomon's way of that old saying, life isn't fair. See, we think our mamas invented that. It wasn't our mamas. That's been a reality since life began here, or very shortly thereafter. Verse 8, whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stone may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. Okay, stop and think about this one for a second. What is Solomon's point? Whoever digs a pit may fall in. Whoever breaks through a wall may get bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries the stone may get crushed. Whoever splits logs may get hurt. I mean, it's all true, right? I mean, you can get hurt doing about anything, and all these things are reasonably dangerous. So, what do you think Solomon's point was? His point was stay alert and understand there are consequences for our actions. And our intention isn't necessarily what causes the consequence. You know, if we're digging a pit, we're digging a pit for a reason. Maybe we're digging out a septic tank, or we're digging a well, or we're digging whatever it is we're digging. Our purpose in doing that is not to fall into it ourselves, but yet it could happen. We put ourselves in situations where unexpected things and unfortunate things occur. We're quarrying stone. Well, we're digging and cutting stone, probably to build something. Back in Jesus' day, or even Solomon's day, Solomon did a lot of building. The Temple Mount was built by Solomon. And that stone was quarried underground and carried, and they're huge stones, bigger than those at the Great Pyramid at Giza, actually. How they did it, nobody knows. But his point here is, you're doing a good job doesn't mean it's not a dangerous situation. Doesn't mean that it can't go wrong. Bad things don't just happen to fools. Sometimes they happen to the best of us. Like breaking through a wall. In this case, bitten by a snake. They built their structures out of rock and wood, so great places for varmints to hide. But, you know, this would be more like me. If you place a socket or an electrical outlet, you might get shocked. Actually, if I'm doing it, I can pretty much guarantee I will. Hopefully not badly, but I'll probably get a tingle somewhere along the way to remind, hey, stupid, turn off the breaker. And I've done a couple where the breaker was off, but it was getting cross-fed from somewhere else, and that was a rude awakening, to be sure. That's why I'm not an electrician. Look at verse 10, because this actually goes with it. I actually knew of somebody. I had technically I think it's a great cousin. It was my dad's, I forget exactly. But read the end of verse 9 again. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. If the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed, but skill will bring success. One of the most dangerous things you can do if you're splitting wood is do it with a dull axe. I don't know how many of us have done this anymore. It's still a handy skill to have. It's a skill you actually have to develop to hit that stupid little log with an axe. But the more dull your axe is, the harder you have to hit that piece of wood. And the harder you swing, the more likely something's going to go terribly wrong. In fact, the relative, I can't remember exactly who it was, way back in I want to say the 30s, 40s at least, may have even been an uncle, so maybe been older than that, lost a foot because they were out cutting wood and missed. And didn't hit the log, didn't hit the wood, hit their own foot before they were done. And there's lots of stories like that out there. So what do you think the purpose of this proverb is? It's not just to say, hey, you may cut your foot off if you split wood. His purpose is found there at the last line. All actually, efforts in life are made easier and are done better with skill than brute force. Brute.
And it's not talking about how to go and cut down a tree. It's talking about us in life.
Absolutely.
We need to strengthen or sharpen, if we use the analogy here.
Sharpen our tools.
Yes, our attitude,
Mm-hmm.
our those skills, the way we interact with people, the way we treat people, all of these things. You can't go and just do it out of brute force and just say, you know, scoot over, get out of the way. You know,
You might,
there's a way to do it.
maybe you could use brute force, but it's not going to be pretty in the end.
Yes, and it's not going to last.
Yeah.
that person that you use it on will not respect you, will not, and when you go to try to share the gospel, when you go to try to do something like this, that's what they're going to remember. They're going to remember how you acted, how you treated people, how.
Absolutely. In fact, I think one of the best examples of how this really applies to us, especially in today's world, is in the realm of communication. You know, you can get a point across using brute force. You can yell loud enough, say it frequently enough, be rude enough that people just have to pay attention, or you can actually use skill and do it a lot more precisely and with a lot less damage along the way. It's sort of like, I guess, a good enough doctor could do an appendectomy with a sharpened trowel if they had to. I would personally much rather, if it was me, they had a nice, clean, sharp scalpel and use their refined skills to do it, and not, yeah, and not just be digging it out. Um, absolutely, and not just physically, but spiritually. I remember years ago, and this was back when I was first starting out. So you know, the dinosaurs hadn't been gone that long. Uh, I remember reading an interview with what was then a contemporary Christian band, and they were talking about getting the word of Jesus out. But they were known to be really in your face. It's back when punk rock was really first taking off, and they were known to be sort of rude about it. And in the article, they were saying, well, this is too important. We can't, afford to be gentle. We just got to put it out there. And I remember then, and I wasn't that smart then, thinking, that's a dumb answer. It's not just, no, we got to throw it in people's faces. No, we have to be careful how we communicate. Because a moment of bluntness can do a lot more damage than just a well-chosen, skillfully used word. When we really work on our communication, we find we get much better at it. We find that we can deal with issues in a much less destructive way. And again, this goes and applies to pretty much everything else.
You hear a lot about first impressions, how
Mhm.
important they are, and they are very important because when you meet someone for the first time, uh, that kind of sets the tone. It's hard to live down after you made a bad impression.
Yeah, first impressions, quick to make, forever to correct, right? And that's one thing I'm proud of our congregation on the whole is I think we tend to make pretty good first impressions. But I can tell you that can change very rapidly. The congregation I worked for when I was younger, um, we thought of ourselves as very, very friendly, and traditionally had been a very friendly, very outgoing. I mean, it actually remind me of what that church was like at that point. But as time went on, the church was growing, things were happening, everybody was getting really busy. And there was one Sunday in particular where we had a visitor, and in the parking lot, the visitor had a dead battery, flat tire. I actually don't remember what it was at this point. And we got a message the next week about how unfriendly our church was. First, they didn't feel like anybody had really talked to them while they were there. And then here they are trying to change a flat tire in the middle of the parking lot, and not a single person walked up and said, you need help? Can we do anything for you? Whatever. And I remember the leadership was just flabbergasted. Like, what? How did that happen? And the reality was everybody was just busy doing their own thing and nobody was paying attention. And even though maybe on any other Sunday we would have been a really friendly church, on that Sunday, for that family, we weren't. And I guarantee to this day, if that family, whoever they were, I didn't even know them, talks about that church, it was an unfriendly, terrible place to be.
That there is a perfect example that is our responsibility to stay alert, to stay vigilant, and just see how we are as a congregation.
Absolutely.
That's how important that is. And we could, like Perry said, I mean, you could, it affects other people, and it can hurt other people so much. Say, well, I'll never go to that church, or I'll never. And how many times you hear people say that? And a lot of times for the wrong reason, but there's times that there's they're they're justified with reasons.
Oh, absolutely. When I was I was a teenager. When we moved to the place where, where Mom still lives, there were three congregations. Actually, there were more than that. There were probably 6 or 7 congregations, but three bigger congregations in that town. So we planned just to visit all three to see which one we'd fit with, because there was no difference in distance or anything else. We went to the first one, and people were friendly, but we expected people to be. We'd moved around a lot. We knew how this worked. Um, but especially my little brother, the lady who taught his Bible class just really reached out to him. Well, we hope to see you back, blah, blah, blah. When we were leaving, remember my mom or dad once saying, well, next Sunday we'll go try this other church. My brother's like, no, I have to be back here. She said I need to be here, and I want to be here because, and we're like, well, okay, we'll give the other churches a chance, though. Just calm down. Well, the next congregation we went to, and we were a younger family. Dad grayed early like me, so he looked older, but 3 kids. We'd been in church all of our life. We were honestly the kind of kind of family any church wants to catch. We already know all the rules. We know how it's going on. We're involved. It's the easy one, right? We walk into the second church, and we get there, 5-10 minutes early. Walk slowly down the aisle, find a pew. Nobody says a word to us. And we're sort of like wanting to talk, but everybody's busy talking to each other. After church, same thing happens. We slowly walk out because we're wanting to meet people, actually, but we're the newbies. We're the ones out of our comfort zone. We're not sure, and everybody's so busy, for whatever reason, we make it all the way out of the building, and nobody talked to us again. Except maybe somebody that, we say, oh, hi, hi, and then they're on with their stuff. We got to the car, and I still remember this very vividly. Dad said, you know what? We're just going back to the other church. And that's how that decision was made. It was just one visit at each, and yes, it was a snap judgment, but it was an honest decision at that point. One place made us feel accepted and welcome and like they wanted us there. The other place acted like we didn't exist. Now, what's funny is we went on to be good friends with a lot of people at the other church, and eventually the two even merged, so we ended up going to church with them anyway. But first impressions are huge. And you don't get over them very easily. I'm forgetting how we got to that now, but that's okay. Sharpening our skills. There we go. That was it. Thank you, Joe. Look at verse 11. If a snake bites before it is charmed, the charmer receives no fee. Again, you got to stop with these proverbs and think about what he's talking about. Snake charmer is a performer, right? That's the only reason they ever do it. You always see the picture in the Middle East of the wicker basket and the cobra coming up. They're putting on a show. They're selling something. And if it doesn't work, they're not going to get paid. But the same is true in a lot of other areas of life. If we don't succeed in what we're trying to do, we shouldn't expect to benefit from whatever it is. There's a correlation here. Now, the good thing is, remember, these proverbs are given more from a worldly perspective. They are still true. But the nice thing is, we have a God that can even handle a snake bite if he needs to. Metaphorically, if not literally. Think of here's a modern example, a waitress or waiter. They spill your food, mess up your drink, totally foul up your check. How big of a tip they're going to get at the end? Probably not much. Now, I worked in a restaurant for a while when I was a kid. So I feel bad enough. It's very seldom I won't tip anything. But there have been a few times the service was so bad, I'm like, I'd give them something, but they didn't earn a thing. It's just the reality of it. Of course, I may be lucky. There may be some Sundays people are saying don't pay him this week. Uh, you know, that could be the case too. Hope I didn't put an idea in somebody's head there. Here's a good one. Words from the mouth of the wise are gracious, but the fools are consumed by their own lips. What's the old saying? He who speaks little is thought to be dumb. He who speaks much is known to be. Sort of a Confucius version of this proverb. At the beginning, their words are folly. At the end, they are wicked madness. And fools multiply words. I shouldn't read this passage in an election year. But it's the reality. At the beginning, their words are folly. At the end, they are wicked madness. And fools multiply words. I think sometimes the hardest thing is knowing when to shut up. For me, anyway.
And the thing about this is that this is coming from the smartest man, of our time, in this time for sure.
Wisest man to ever live.
Yes, and this is what he's concluded is even though you have all the wisdom in the world, you can still make these dumb mistakes because wisdom alone isn't anything.
No. And that's exactly it. And the sad thing is Solomon made a lot of these mistakes. His wisdom didn't necessarily save him. And he let foolishness and folly and sin into his life. And it caused all kinds of problems. This other one's pretty big here too, there in verse 14. No one knows what is coming, and who can tell someone else what will happen after them? I think this is really important in today's world. I mean, let's be realistic for a second. We live in a day and age where we have all the information in the world at our fingertips. I mean, I'm reading my Bible, mainly because of my eyes, from an iPad. I could use this little small book-sized device to look up just about any information in the world that exists. And I can probably find it. But there's a problem with that. We get all this information, but the truth is we don't know what to do with it or how to use it. And inevitably, most people take all this information we're given and they make predictions, telling us what's going to happen next, telling us what to expect. If this happens, then this will happen. It's happening right now all the time with our election. If this person wins, this is going to happen. If this person wins, this is going to happen. The reality is nobody knows. I mean, there may be some educated guesses, but in the end, a guess is just a guess. Nobody knows what tomorrow holds except one person, God. And as a Christian, that should be good enough for us. He knows what tomorrow holds, and he can get us through it, whether it's foolishness or wisdom that prevails. Nobody knows what will happen after them. I mean, just think back through modern history. I mean, there's the recent modern history. How many times should the world have ended already? Just in the past 100 years. And granted, we've done a bang-up job in trying to get close several times in the past 100 years. And there have been doomsday sayers all along the way. This is going to kill us. This is going to kill us. And a lot of the stuff isn't good and was bad. Nuclear holocaust would be horrible. But at the same time, nobody really knows what the future holds. So let's apply this to the New Testament. Let's give the Christian view of it. What did Jesus say? When you go to the Sermon on the Mount, he said, don't worry about tomorrow. Each day has enough trouble of its own. So if you take that there in Matthew 5 or 6, actually maybe chapter 6, it's in the Sermon on the Mount. Read it. You'll find it, 5, 6, and 7. It's all right there. Uh, he never tells us don't worry. There are always things today that are worth being concerned about. What's wrong right now that needs my attention? But at the same time, don't get so caught up on where this might lead that you're worried and fighting about something that's 50 steps down the road and we may not ever make it to it. That may not be where all this is going. Um, it's when we try to predict the future, we fail. I mean, Christians have been failing at this for 2,000 years. There has not been a decade pass, I believe, in the past 2,000 years that one group of Christians or another have not been absolutely positive the world is about to end because they can see the signs and read the signs and blah, 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 and here we go. And inevitably, oops, we misread something. There's one guy, I can't even remember his name now, but in the past 20 years, he's predicted 3 different times, this is it. Jesus is coming. Of course, now I have a very different take on this. I believe Jesus said, nobody's going to know. And there are no signs. There were signs for the Jews to know the end of the Jewish kingdom was at hand. But for us waiting on Jesus, he said, oh, thief in the night. Meaning no calling card to warn that I'm coming. But that's a whole other class. We'll do that some other time. We got a few more minutes here. Verse 15. The toil of fools wearies them. They do not know the way to town. Solomon had a great way of putting things. If I was going to interpret this in a modern language, foolish people make it really hard on themselves. Going in circles. They don't get one thing done, they jump to the next thing, and then the next thing can't work because the first thing wasn't done, and they just keep making problems for themselves. You see this in business a lot. Business, education, all over the place, politics. Somebody who just runs around putting out fires, but it's like they're dragging the fire behind them. Everywhere, as soon as they put out this fire, they go to the next, but the truth is it's relighting right behind them. And it's you don't actually ever accomplish anything, and it's wearisome. You ever been in that situation where you feel like you've worked your tail end off, and at the end you had nothing to show for it? Just nothing worked. For me, I look back at those times, it's usually because I wasn't real smart about what I was doing, and I caused a whole lot more work for myself. I'm not exactly sure what the phrase "they do not know the way to town" means. I read a couple of commentaries that they didn't know either, so I figure I'm in good company there. Verse 16. Woe to the land whose king was a servant and whose princes feast in the morning. Let me read the next verse because it's a contrasting pair here. Blessed is the land whose king is of noble birth and whose princes eat at the proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. Why do you think, here's interesting, because we're not into nobility, right? We're Americans here in the West. We bow our knees to no one. We do not believe in royal bloodlines or any of that. So woe to the land whose king was a servant. Why do you think he says that? Because let's be frank about it. What was Solomon's dad before he became king? He was the least person in his household. That's why he was the shepherd. In fact, in David's day and time, it was often the youngest daughter who was old enough would be the shepherd. That was actually woman's work in that day and age because the men needed to be ready to go fight or go to war or do other things. But since David was the youngest and there was no girl to give it to, he was the least of all of his brothers. That's why he wasn't called to join the party when the prophet came to see them, and he had to ask for him later. So it's not really fair for Solomon to say, well, if you're not of noble birth, you can't be a good king, because his dad was a far better king than Solomon was, and he was not of noble birth. Solomon was just one generation in. So what do you think that means? Let me tell you a story. Maybe the story will help. In one of the towns I lived, a congregation was going through a building project, a big one. It was going to be a couple of million by the time it was all over. And a complete big renovation. We ended up building a big family life center, and I wish I could pick it up and plop it down here. That would be nice. Um, Part of the family life center had a really nice kitchen in it that even had some commercial equipment, some consumer. It was depending on what we could afford and get at the time. But it was a big kitchen where, this was a congregation of 600 at the time, so we could use that big space. It was great. But in the town we were in, the city inspector, before he became city inspector, he was actually a janitor. Now, do I have any problem with janitors? No. I've known some great, in fact, one of my favorite person at this congregation was actually the janitor. He's the hardest working man I knew and one of the sweetest, best, and he earned his money 10 times over. And he was very smart to boot. But the city inspector, here's what happened. You go from having a job where you're given very little respect and you have really no authority, and then you have a job where you have power over other people all of a sudden. What happens? It goes to your head. And this guy, for that church, was one of the biggest jerks for a while. He actually went in at one point and he said we had to put in a 500-gallon grease trap under our kitchen. And we were like, do you think we're McDonald's? I mean, what's going on here? Finally, some of the guys that were part of it all had to appeal to the mayor and get the mayor to make this guy calm down, because he was just going to throw everything at us he could possibly throw at us. Maybe he didn't like them. I don't know the backstory. But that's part of what Solomon's talking about here. Be careful when somebody is given power who hasn't had power before. I mean, that can happen in business. It can happen in families. It can happen in lots of places. And then he ties that to the idea of, okay, the other ones in power, how do they behave? And the two examples are, well, these guys eat in the morning. The idea is they get up and they just gorge themselves and they get drunk, and they're not doing anything useful. Compared to the other side where those in power are taking care of business. Because even in the ancient world, when you had kings and princes and all that, they actually had jobs to do. A good king had a very hard job. He was responsible for his whole kingdom. The nobility beneath him were his middle management to help run the kingdom. And the people they served actually were the citizens. Now, not every kingdom worked that way. There were always bad kings, but there were some good ones, of which Israel had a few. Tell you what, we are at our point here, so I'm going to pause there because the next one's going to be fun to talk about. And we'll pick up next Wednesday, since we'll be remote again. We'll pick up in verse 18 of chapter 10. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in and taking part. Keep praying for those who are sick, praying for our community, pray for the school that no more cases pop up. We're pretty much clear. That's a very, very good thing. And then be praying for our trunk or treat, that we'll actually be able to pull that off the way we want to. All right, well, let's end with a word of prayer, and then we'll end the stream. Father, we love you. We thank you for today. We thank you for this time to be in your word, to consider Solomon's wisdom, which, Father, we realize was a gift from you and not just creation of some person. Father, we pray for ourselves and our families, that we can take your wisdom and your graciousness and your mercy and your holiness, Father, and exemplify those things in our lives. We pray for our country, Father, as it struggles and fights against itself, that you will Help us as your children to stand up as beacons of peace and light and hope. As we, Father, go through an election that has shown the divisions, Father, in our society, that you will help us be peacemakers and be instruments of unity, Father, and not of division. But most of all, Father, help us be a reflection of our Lord and